Hello, friends of Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it is coffee time. Time when I go over some of the things that have come across my desk since the last coffee break, which was several days ago at this point. As you can see, I have my patriarchy card on display. I'm a VIP club member, and that authorizes me to comment on all the carryings on and goings on of the evil feminist empire, which has spread its evil tentacles all the way around the world, and thousands upon thousands of very well-funded organizations, many of whom are behind the Black Lives Matter and Antifa movement. By the way, the feminist movement is the mother of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They share ideological similarities too striking to ignore, and many of the members of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, if not all of the members of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, are feminists. They're radical feminists. They have been preaching for destroy capitalism, to kill all men and reduce the population of men, and for men to get out of the way and give women power for everything. And feminism has opened their umbrella branch to include everything and anything that could be described as not male and not white. Feminism is a hate movement. There is no other way to describe feminism. It is a globally organized, well-funded hate movement, and it has a purpose. The purpose is to support the goals of the very wealthy and the very powerful in the world. And of course, the very wealthy and the very powerful are not at risk from women. They are at risk from ambitious, competitive, competent men. And feminism serves very strongly to keep them at bay, to pull the ladders out beneath them. So that's not really the topic of the show today. The show today is going to be on, well, the title is Your Silence is Not Enough. This is the rise of Stalinism, of Marxism, of totalitarianism on the backs, well, pushed forward by BLM and Antifa. I want to pause for a moment and welcome the regulars to the show. Welcome to Olivia Gay and Yellow Bendy, Bill Barry, and several others here. And the first, Michael Keller is there. Bill Barry, I see you there from the very beginning. Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. I hope you're going to find this interesting. Every single day, almost every single hour, or every single 10 minutes, lately, something new transpires or some new development comes out around these rioters, these terrorists. And Trump has identified them exactly as domestic terrorists. It's about time. Most of us here in the Red Pill community and the MRA community knew that Antifa and BLM were domestic terrorists a long, long time ago. I've faced them at Janice's lectures at university campuses, and I faced both BLM and Antifa there. They are nothing but small-minded, bigoted, hateful terrorists. So, with no further ado, let's get into some of the material here. Here are a few images and screen caps just to get us kicked off here to see the lunacy of what's going on. And as you've probably seen, if you follow any of my personal stuff on Twitter or Facebook, I've been attacked fairly, well, enough to comment on it by these Antifa BLM feminists, all because I stated, and I've had to unfriend a number of people, and in fact, ironically and probably on a positive note, I've gained new friends I didn't know I had from free friend requests for this incident. But I'm not bemoaning losing friends. Anybody who's supporting BLM rioters, terrorists, feminists, or Antifa, they're all the same group of people. I'm not going to mourn losing them. But I did say on a comment stream to someone who was all about BLM and talking them up as if this was some kind of righteous moment, I said, I'm never going to kneel to BLM or Antifa. They're domestic terrorist groups, and that's what kicked it all off. So anyways, let's get straight on to some of the lunatic images that we're seeing come out from people who have been accepting this idea of white guilt and white privilege. Well, I've made a few Twitter posts on this. White privilege and white guilt are two terms very thinly veiled to accuse you of being a white supremacist. There is the irony of this, of course, is that you cannot change the color of your skin. These are people accusing you of being a white supremacist on the basis of the color of your skin, not your behavior, not anything you've done, not anything you said. You are considered guilty, and you can never be unguilty to these people. And they want, on the strength of the color of your skin, they want you to pay reparations and bow to other people on the basis of the color of their skin, not on the color, on the rationale of that they've suffered anything whatsoever, merely, completely, and totally on the color of their skin. They want your white-skinned people to bow down and give reparations to them on the basis of the color of their skin. That is virtually the definition of racism. And here we see an example of how not to behave as any colored person, putting yourself in chains because of the color of your skin, and forever apologizing. This has been going on pretty much all of my life. People apologizing for the color of their skin. And well, this image speaks for itself. Let's move on to the next one here. Read the hypocrisy of this situation. Here, the same people are holding up one sign here, says stop police brutality, and the other sign says we are not our ancestors, we will F you up. Well, those combinations of signs really does describe the complete hypocrisy, the illegitimacy, the bigotry, and the hatred of these movements, as if we needed more. And here, the Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi, bowing to the terrorists. Bowing to the terrorists, folks. Nancy Pelosi is an embarrassment to politics. She's an embarrassment to the U.S. And this, and I'm going to argue about this as we go on, through this show, this characterizes and symbolizes what this is all about. The Democrats support the rioters, the terrorists. Some people are suggesting that they're creating this as a diversion. As we'll see soon, there's a lot of stuff going on in the court system that the Democrats don't want us to see. They don't want the news to report on it. So, where does that leave us? Let's carry on with some. As I'm speaking here, I'm looking for another comment that I wanted to highlight for you. I can't find it here, but let's carry on. Here where is this? Cary, North Carolina, people are washing the feet of the organizers and asking for forgiveness. These are people who are not done anything wrong. On the color of your skin, you're supposed to wash your feet of and ask forgiveness for other people on the basis of the color of their skin. It is racism this is all racist. There are other motives for them doing this too, which have to do with the election and for power in the world for sure. George Soros is no innocent guy, and for sure he's once again funding Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Let's read this quote here from the Daily Wire. And by the way, I'm going to try and clean up my language here. I realize some people don't appreciate the language, and it does reduce foul language, and it does reduce the audience. So I do get a bit wound up in these discussions as it goes on sometimes, and I'm going to try and keep a lid on that. Let's read this title here. Black Lives Matter, quote, What We Believe page says, disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family, dismantle cisgender privilege. Well, that there is feminist talk. It's all feminist talk. Let's read a quote from here. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. These people never need any data to support their claims. They just pull these claims right out of the dark side of their underside, their butts, and they expect us to believe it because it sounds good to them. Here, another quote from that same article, quoting Black Lives Matter people. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family. Feminism. Reading from the top here. We foster queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual. There has never been that belief. Long, long before these feminists ever started to gain the power they had today, there was heterosexuality. And in fact, even in my childhood, I never saw a homosexual harassed and beat up for being a homosexual in my childhood. I'm not saying it didn't happen in the world. It does happen. It's just not the overarching and massively only important thing that's going on in the world. We have every need to protect everyone from violence, no matter what where their status of life is. I'm going to pause here for a moment and recognize Mr. F for his generous contributions to Studio Brûlé. Mr. F says, keep up the good work, Steve. Too few people can recognize the truth and fewer are willing to speak it. That is true. Thank you very much for the encouragement, Mr. F. And I encourage everyone to the level of your comfortability to speak out whenever you can. Of course, don't put yourself in danger in doing that. And I recognize that I am in a somewhat of a privileged position here as not having a traditional job to lose. I don't have a boss to fire me. I only have YouTube to demonetize and various other places like Patreon who like to dismantle or deplatform conservative friendly people. But I don't have a boss to come knocking on my door and say, hey, we don't like what you said, so you're fired. A lot of people out there do. A lot of people listening right now do. So I perfectly understand if you don't feel comfortable speaking out because of your situation in life. Keep in mind, I'm 60. I'm 60. I'm not wealthy, but I'm not terribly concerned. I probably won't live long enough to be thrown out on the street for lack of money. And Tom Forsyth says, Steve just confessed his privilege. Yeah, I guess I did. But it's not white privilege and it's not male privilege. Oh, they're trying to cancel me. If you watch the little drama that unfolded in Facebook and Twitter, you would have seen some members, anyways, of the filmmaking community, the independent filmmaking community, of which many of them are the intolerant left variety, the feminists, the radical feminists, the Antifa, the BLM, the people who preach tolerance while trying to shut everybody up, as in, or compel your speech with a gun to your head, virtually. So I've been threatened with being blackballed at every film festival across Canada. It turns out the person making the threat's just full of hot air and doesn't have any influence in the film industry to speak of. But that's a side issue here. Let's carry on with the next slide here. Here, a Hoover Fellow says, the Black Lives Matter movement is deeply unserious. Okay, that just might be the understatement of the year. Let's read what he has to say. Shelby Steele, a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, said Friday that the contemporary civil rights movement under the banner of Black Lives Matter was deeply unserious, catering to an old form of victimization that has accomplished nothing to lift up Black people. Amen. Reading on with me. Striking to me is that about this particular one is that was not even a list of demands. Usually there's always a long, elaborate list of demands. That wasn't the case here. There's nothing that you could come away from this entire episode, the last 2 weeks or so, that's meaningful, he said. Very true. It's just rioting. We know what they really want. They are after the destruction of patriarchy and the destruction of capitalism. They're outwardly saying that even as they riot. But most of the rioters just want a free TV and some new Nike shoes for free that they're stealing, and to take out their anger by destroying other people's property they worked hard for. Reading from the top, George Floyd's story has been the story of Black folks because ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted to and dreamed of being is you kept your knee on our necks, Al Sharpton said. And he, in this article, I didn't capture quite enough to put the context on this. This fellow is deeply critical of Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton's done more to foster racial tension in the U.S. than probably almost anyone else. He's one of the people making a living off of stirring up racism. Let's read on from the top. Al Sharpton is the master of this old form of politics that comes out of the 60s, where we as Blacks cry victimization and demand the larger society give us things of some kind or another, Steele said. Keep in mind, this fellow Steele is a Black academic. Reading from the top. White Americans live under this accusation that they're not racist. That they are not racist. I'm not sure what he's... White Americans live under this accusation that they are not racist. I think maybe the Blacks are not racist. I forget the context of this. They need to prove that they're not racist. Yeah, I think he means there that they are racist. Then white people need to prove that they're not racist. In order to prove that you're not racist, you need to take over the fate of Black people and say, go with us. We'll engineer you into the future. We'll engineer you into equality, Steele said. Life doesn't work like that. We have to engineer ourselves, period. There is no other way. That's right. The implication of the Al Sharptons of the world is that white people need to solve all problems for these Black people who are complaining. Let's read from the top. I will take those things seriously when I also hear from Sharpton and others the argument that we need within the Black community to work on the institution of marriage. Steele said, citing the fact that 75% of Black children are born out of wedlock with no father. Well, that's an argument I've been hearing a lot lately, and it's a good argument. The majority of men in prison are fatherless, and if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty on that, you have a look at Warren Farrell's, I think it's called The Boy Crisis. Warren Farrell lays this out in no uncertain terms with backup statistics and backup quotations and references coming out your ears. You could spend the rest of your life just studying what Warren Farrell has presented in his book, and you would get to the bottom of it. But the thing is that takes work and responsibility on the people involved. They don't want to do that. These rioters just want to loot. Reading this quote, I don't care how many social programs you have, you're not going to overcome that. By that, he means the problem of fatherlessness in the Black community. And that problem of fatherlessness in the Black community, feminists will blame it on the men, but that is not true. A huge, as we know from divorces, 70% of divorces are initiated by women. I suspect there's no different in the Black community, possibly even more. Many of these women are known to have several baby daddies, what really goes on with some of those baby mamas in the projects is that they're sending their baby daddies out to commit crimes and bring the goodies back to them. This is going on, not in every case, obviously. There's obviously legitimate women, single mothers who are leaving abusive men. But in the majority of cases, the studies that I've been exposed to are indicating that even in domestic violence marriages, the violence is two-sided. It goes both ways. Let's read on. Here, someone in my Facebook put up this. I don't see why I have this here. This is somebody I had to block on Facebook. I didn't want to go over this. What is this? Okay, here's another quote from somebody here. A black woman telling all us Whitey's the cracker. I start to refer to myself on a couple of shows as Whitey the cracker. That's how the Black Lives Matter people see me. They are racist. I have heard a lot of these kinds of terms over my life. White bread, Casper the ghost, Whitey, cracker, all kinds of terms have been thrown at me. These are racist terms. I didn't let it get to me. And it wasn't because I'm not because of white privilege that I didn't let it get to me. I've faced that racism in a Caribbean island on an all-black bus, where the guy came in and saw me, looked me in the eye, and said out, "Kill the Pope," looking at me. You know that means that's racism. Is definitely intended for me to associate my whiteness with the Catholic Pope. Most of the people in the bus sat there, said nothing. A few people sniggered and laughed, and a couple of older ladies told the guy to shut up. But that's racism. And everybody in this world, no matter what color you are, what race you are, what gender you are, you've faced some bigotry some point in your life, because it is part of humanity. It's probably connected to our urge and drive to have in-groups for self-protection and out-groups that we fear. But I don't want to get into that kind of analysis. I don't know. But the fact is that the experience of racism and the reality of being racist exists in every single conceivable group you could conceive around this planet without exception. Without exception. What it means is that we've got to stop that. What it means really is that these Black Lives Matter, these feminists, these Antifa, who are trying to define racism as being white, those are the true racists. What we need to do is make it clear that any racism is not tolerated, including racism against white people. An experience of racism is an experience that an individual feels. A race doesn't feel. No other white person who wasn't there when I was treated to that "kill the Pope" comment, nobody else felt that. They weren't in that bus at that day, at that time. I felt it as an individual. And there was a few black ladies who were courageous enough to tell that 25-year-old black fellow to behave. And that's the behavior we all need to take on. When we see the racism, we call it out. We put the responsibility, the guilt on the racist individual. So let's read what this racist black woman is saying here. To my well-intentioned white friends, here's a harsh truth I need you to accept. Some black folks will never be okay with you. And if you truly care about righting racial injustice, you have to fight for us anyways. So in other words, kneel down, you damn slave. Do what we say and don't complain about it, no matter how racist we treat you. This is what she's saying. Now this article, read the title with me. Black Lives Matter Melbourne tells white people no selfies. If a black person tells you to do something, you do it immediately without question. This is from Paul Joseph Watson a few days ago. This is the nature of Black Lives Matter. This is the nature of Black Lives Matter. There's a whole list here. I'm not going to read through all of this, but basically they're telling people, white people, you have to stay at the back of the bus, that you can't speak unless you're given permission to speak by a black person, that you have to do whatever a black person says immediately without question, and you have to stop whatever you're doing immediately if a black person tells you. These are the instructions for white people. White folks' guide to protesting. Let's read on here. The irony is that protest leaders are basically enforcing racial segregation by keeping the white attendees away from the main demonstrators. And this, just to remind ourselves that George Soros is never far away from these events. George Soros wired $1.7 million to Antifa. And his tax return proves it, this article from 2017. And here, this is a woman on a videotape with a racist black supremacist group. She's kissing or licking the boots of every one of the black male leaders at this presentation on the street. There she is doing it over and over again. I caught the name of the group here. It's Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, they call themselves. And they are a hate group citing, this is SPLC, not that I give terrible credibility SPLC probably forced to identify these as a hate group. SPLC has a terrible track record of attacking people on a political basis. But that's black supremacism rising in the US. Now I'm going to just pull up another quote here. I wanted to just try and call up a post I made some time ago, which doesn't seem to be coming up to me here. I had a post that I wanted to read out to you in case you haven't read it. I put it onto Facebook and into Twitter about white privilege and white guilt and what it really means. For some reason, Twitter is not allowing, or rather Facebook is not allowing me to find it at the moment. Well, I'll have to go along with, oh, here we go. Here it is here. But it's not coming up. Why is this not allowing me to see it? No, sorry folks, I cannot find that at the moment. So here is the essence of today's coffee break. Your silence isn't enough. Come out a couple of days ago. Let's read a couple of quotes from this article. The social justice left is pioneering a new tactic for shutting down dissent and amplifying groupthink. Yep. It is abundantly clear that social justice activists and increasingly mainstream left-wing Americans do not intend to relent in yielding the cultural power of rage mobs to erase all trace of contrary opinions. They want to compel you. This is part of the humiliation process. Once you're forced to speak out, they're first forcing you to kneel, then they're forcing you to speak out and declare your allegiance to the goals and sentiments of the Black Lives Matter and Antifa community. It's a form of social engineering. It's a form of humiliation. It's a form of propaganda that makes it very difficult for the individual to walk back from. Reading from the top. The New York Times published an op-ed by Republican Senator Tom Cotton arguing that the president should invoke the Insurrection Act, sending federal troops to help the country restore order across the country. Times took to Twitter to insist that the paper must retract Cotton's op-ed, as it put blacks New York Times staff in danger. So here what we have, an opinion published in the New York Times suggesting that the president should invoke the Insurrection Act, and the editors insisted that it be retracted. Let's read on. Earlier last week, New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees offered his opinion that he would never support kneeling during the national anthem, suggesting that to do so is disrespectful. Within a day, Brees had knelt before the livid masses, offering not one but two obsequious apologies for having voiced this supposedly insensitive view. In other words, your silence is not enough. You cannot disagree with them, and if you do, you will lose your job. And finally, on Thursday, a progressive writer at Vox was bullied by his peers on the left into deleting tweets that acknowledged he had been wrong to think campus silencing tactics would stay confined to the campus. The irony was breathtaking to behold. Here, a guy said earlier that he thought that this campus silencing tactics would never leave campus. Here, we're seeing them out in the broad general public at every stratum of our society. He was wrong. He tweeted that he was wrong to suggest that. And in full-on irony, his own leftist colleagues forced him to delete his admitting that he was wrong in that. So it's almost, it makes you speechless to watch it. It makes you speechless to realize just what these kinds of people are. The leftists, the Black Lives Matter, the Antifa, and the feminists, they're all of a mind. They intend to force you to kneel. They intend to force you to recant any contradiction to their ideology that you might have uttered. And then they will require you to repeat their ideological message in full. And after you've done all that, they'll still fire you. Let's read on. Over the course of the same few hours, one of his colleagues at Vox was shamed into apologizing for having uttered the heretical view that perhaps rushing to defund or abolish the police, as activists are now demanding, might not be the most prudent course of action. No opinion differing from the ideological purity of the feminists, and I'll say it's the feminists because it's them that gave birth to all of these movements, none of that, no dissent can be tolerated. Many more have taken to social media to promote Black Lives Matter and fundraise for jail funds to release rioters from jail. Almost uniformly, these cultural warriors have begun parroting the troubling notion that silence is complicity, demanding that we all vocally sign on to their agenda. This is the taking of the oath process. And of course, once you've taken the oath, if you go back from your oath, you're an oath breaker. It's humiliating. It's a humiliation tactic. It's a trick. Don't do it. You're better off losing your job because you probably will anyways. I'm going to pause here for a moment to recognize Oki Migtau. Thank you for your generous donation to in support of Studio Brûlé, Oki Migtau. And Oki says, in my quiet town, the third wave feminists protested in a city council meeting with no evidence, just solipsism, to defund the police. Done with society. Thank you for pointing that out, Oki. This is going on right across North America, in fact. Reading from the top here again. According to this view, if you fail to use your platform to speak out about the progressive issue du jour, you are guilty of perpetrating injustice against the oppressed. It is our civic responsibility and obligation to educate ourselves, by which they mean accepting and memorizing the prevailing progressive dogma, and then to repeat what we've learned, faithful comrades in their holy war. Thank you for having the bravery to write these words. It's exactly what is going on today. And reading again from the top. On one hand, then, progressives work to ensure that contrary beliefs are disallowed in polite discourse. On the other, they insist that we are compelled by the demands of justice to speak publicly about every social justice issue. If we articulate a view that challenges the progressive creed, then will drum us out of polite company. If we do not speak at all, we are guilty of sinning by omission. This is a trap. And reading from the top, the only way to reconcile them is in an insidious belief that each and every one of us must speak so as not to be complicit in evil, but only to utter the words that the progressive movement puts in our mouths. The result is ideological servitude, a society in which a culturally powerful, tyrannical minority owns the voice of every person willing to go along. This is exactly true, and it's a perilous road to even flirt with. Don't do it, is what I say to all of you. Close your mouth. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say. At the very least, you can close your mouth. Don't bow to this. This is another form of forcing you to kneel before them. And this, another incident that's happened recently, and Janice brought this to my attention. Let's read Janice's comment. This woman was removed from CBC for using what they call a word. I think we probably can guess what that word is. Probably begins with N and ends with R. But she used this word, a word, they're saying, behind the scenes, before off cameras, and people heard her and got angry, and now she's out of a job. Reading from the top. Interviewing Jordan Peterson some years ago, Wendell Mesley aims to portray him as an alt-right racist figure, despite his obviously sincere denials. A classic strategy of the CBC. Now she is herself being investigated on a ludicrous charge of hate speech. Let's read what's going on with this woman. They are all eating themselves in some way, but that doesn't mean they're going to go away. They're all learning that they have to compete to demonstrate who is the most ideological pure of the ideological pure. That's the leftist movement right now. Wendell Mesley was removed as host of her CBC show for using a word that no one should ever use, she said. This was just 2 days ago. Using a certain word in a discussion on race. And again, this is reported in several journals. Wendell Mesley suspended for using a word that should never be used. And here she says, I hurt people, and for that I am very sorry. I am also deeply ashamed. No, she's not. She's just caught. Reading from the top. CBC host Wendell Mesley apologizes for using a certain word in a discussion on race. CBC, for anybody who's not Canadian, is Canada's propaganda machine paid for by the Canadian taxpayer through the Liberal government to the tune of between $1 and $2 billion a year. They are a pure leftist, pure feminist. They have radical feminist staff and leadership, and they are sympathetic to Antifa and BLM, and they distort the politics in Canada in favor of the Liberals on the left. Here, Forbes has printed this article. Seattle protesters take over City Hall, demand the mayor's resignation. This was printed yesterday. Probably some of you folks have already seen this. Reading from the top. Protesters in Seattle took over City Hall for about an hour Tuesday night and demanded the resignation of the city's mayor, Jenny Durkin, hours after a Black Lives Matter group sued the Seattle Police Department, alleging that the city had violated the constitutional rights of demonstrators by using harsh crowd control tactics. In just the latest uproar over the police tactics toward protesters in the 2 weeks of turmoil following George Floyd's death. So, they're taking over city capitals. I said that it is civil war. I don't know if it's going to continue on, but we do have a war at hand. We're burning and rioting in the streets. They're organizing. They're taking over sections of cities. They're burning down police stations. This is happening not just in the U.S., but it's happening to some degree in all of the Western world. So it's a civil war, or call it a revolution. Call it what you will. This is a watershed moment, and we cannot walk back from this. folks who are siding with the BLM while they are rioting, looting, killing, destroying property, burning things to the ground, destroying monuments. You think that on the basis of embarrassment for your race, you think that you can walk that back later? You can't. You can't. You're going to live that for the rest of your life. A large group of protesters led by Seattle City Council member Kshama Sawant had two keys to the building. She had the keys to the building. Marched inside City Hall at 9 p.m. and flooded the lobby chanting, "Durkan must go." Durkan is the mayor. Reading from the top. After occupying City Hall for about an hour, the protesters retreated to the self-declared Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, an area outside the police department East Precinct where demonstrators have established a quasi-camp by night, arrayed with memorials of George Floyd before mostly dispersing at around 2 a.m. local time. George Floyd is nothing but a pawn in this. George Floyd didn't deserve to die. That's not the issue. The bigger issue here is that nobody who's being affected by this, losing their lives, losing their businesses, they're losing their homes, their monuments burning down, these people don't deserve this. The only person who deserves to be treated for or punished or investigated for George Floyd's death is the police officers that were involved in the incident. But now George Floyd is being cast as a saint amongst BLM and Antifa people. That's absurd. And if anybody in my friend list wants to celebrate George Floyd as a saint, you can just get out of my life, because when I find out, I'm kicking you out anyways. That's not to say that George Floyd, I know I shouldn't have to say this, but obviously I am not supporting George Floyd's death. There was police excessive use of force, call it brutality, in the incident. But that does not describe all the police forces across North America. That's insane. That's stupid. That's lunacy. That's the lunacy of the left. When asked about the lack of social distancing in City Hall on Tuesday, Sawant recognized that the demonstrators were taking a risk. Quote, "It does enhance the risk," she said. "I don't deny it. The rebellion is still happening. That shows you the complete failure of capitalism as a system." Wow. I mean, talk about a non sequitur. Talk about a non sequitur. She goes straight from this rebellion, call it a rebellion, or call it a revolution, they call it civil war of domestic terrorists is what it really is. It's not caused by capitalism. If it's caused by capitalism, it's caused by the capitalist known as George Soros, an incredibly successful capitalist who's funding all these rioters. The hypocrisy of this knows no end. But there is a motive to this, and the motive to this we're going to get very shortly. This is keeping everybody's eyes glued to the riots and ignoring what's going on in the courts with the Clintons, for instance, as a starter. As Hillary Clinton lost her case and will be forced to answer to her email charges and more. The entire left is terrified of that, because not the least of the reason is because there's a whole pile more people guilty, and it threatens their election in November. There's no question that some of this money has to do with protecting their chances with the upcoming election. I'm going to pause here to recognize Oki Migtau once again. Thank you, Oki, for your generous contributions. And Oki says, "Hillary for prison 2020. I thought she died." No, Hillary is one of those things that's going to stick around smelling up the place for some time yet. So let's carry on to the next section here. Here we have one of the prime movers and shakers of rioting around the world, one of the prime funders of domestic terrorists in the West. The Minnesota, we're going to have a look at this article from Breitbart. This is quite interesting, and all of these links to these articles will be in the description of the video. They are worth reading in their entirety, this one in particular. This title here is Minnesota Freedom Fund faces scrutiny for Antifa and Soros ties and demand that fund is demanding the defunding of police. Why would anybody want to defund the police? As if our society is going to be more peaceful without police. That's absolute insanity. Let's read this quote. As major cities begin picking up the pieces after days of destruction, the rioters and looters can rest easy knowing that they have a get-out-of-jail-free card waiting for them. Bailout charities are suddenly flush with cash, especially the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which has received an unprecedented level of donations from Hollywood stars, including Justin Timberlake, Steve Carell, and Seth Rogen. I suggest we remember these names. These are the people who are siding with the terrorists, the racists. The true racists of the West are the Antifa, the BLM, all of them born from feminism. And these people are self-identifying as racists. Let's read from the top. The MFF stated objective is simple. It raises donations that it uses to bail out suspected criminals from jail and immigration and customs enforcement detention. The once obscure group used to pull in a mere $110,000 a year in donations. Boy, I wish I had that mere $110,000 a year. But in any case, it is small potatoes for these kinds of groups. But since the death of George Floyd while in Minneapolis police custody, it has raked in more than $20 million in less than a week. Reading from the top, the group's aggressive demands to defund the police are also garnering attention. MFF is encouraging donations to Reclaim the Block, which has called for government divestment from the Minneapolis police. Reclaim is receiving financial support from the Squad reps, and you know the regular the characters here, including AOC. The Squad is financially supporting Reclaim, which has called for the government to divestment from Minneapolis police. These are elected officials who are encouraging anarchy. Reading on, MFF has been suspected of harboring Antifa sympathies through its close collaboration with the National Lawyers Guild, a radical leftist organization that has been called Antifa's unofficial legal arm. And you know when they say a radical leftist organization of lawyers, you know it's feminist lawyers. Don't know why they're not using the word feminist, because every last one of those lawyers in that National Lawyers Guild, I will bet, is a radical feminist. And radical feminism is the mother of these two movements. Reading on. President Donald Trump's decision to classify Antifa as a domestic terror group could bring federal scrutiny to how MFF is using its money. Good. Scrutinize them. Reading this quote from the top. In his tweet, President Trump implied that MFF is working, quote, to get anarchists out of jail and probably more, unquote. While MFF hasn't publicly supported Antifa, it coordinates its bail work with the National Lawyers Guild, which does support Antifa. There you go, folks. We have a bunch of radical feminist lawyers who formed a group that supports Antifa, anarchists seeking to tear down society. Let's read on. The NLG recently defended the violent far-left group against President Trump's decision to label it as a domestic terrorist group. Incredible. This is a civil war, if you ask me. I'm going to pause here to recognize Harry Holbrook. Thank you for your generous contribution to Studio Brule, Harry. We really appreciate all of our subscribers and viewers and supporters. As you know, we operate on a very tiny shoestring here. Thank you again, Harry. Reading onwards from this article, MFF partners with the NLG to set bail for suspected criminals. People who have been arrested and jailed during recent Black Lives Matter protests are being told to call NLG, which will then contact the MFF to provide bail money. Greg Lewin, board president of MFF, recently sent out a notice saying that the NLG knows to contact the MFF regarding bail. These people, they're not even hiding it. They are openly trying to create anarchy in the country. They are, in many ways, responsible for the violence, for the rioting, the looting, the burning, the destruction of monuments and property. I'm going to pause here to recognize James Burlow. Thank you so much, James, for your generous contribution to Studio Relay. And James says, it's coming out BLM is an arm of the Democratic Party. Yeah. All money for BLM goes to Act Blue in Boston. Act Blue has $1.5 billion. Yes, and I think I do. Thank you for bringing that up, James. I think I do have some screen caps on that exact topic coming up very shortly. I hope I remembered to include them in this particular one. I've got a lot of screen caps here today. Did I read all of that? I think I did. Yeah. So reading onward. Both organizations have strong ties to anti-Trump billionaire George Soros. George Soros's name always comes up when there's a large-scale riot by domestic terrorists. George Soros is always there. Reading on, MFF Executive Director Tanya Hansi was named a Soros Justice Fellow by the Open Society Foundations in 2019, and this gets interesting. Hansi is a convicted drug offender who was arrested during a meth lab bust in 2002. She was running a meth lab, it looks like, or is certainly connected to it. She has also served time for theft and check forgery. Since being freed, she has worked as a criminal justice reformer and has served on Minnesota's Sentencing Guidelines Commission. What is in the water in Minnesota? What in the... I was going to break my silence on the bad words there, but I caught myself in time. So what is going on in Minnesota? I mean, they seem to be an entire group of lunatics taking over up there. Domestic terrorists. Isn't that where the squad girls are from? Or AOC at least. I'm going to pause and recognize James Burlow again. James, thank you so much for your continued support of Studio Brule. And James says, Act Blue gave Sanders and Biden $250 million and bails out Antifa and rioters. The entire Democratic Party is guilty in this. They are kneeling before these domestic terrorists. What more do we need to see? But there is a lot more, as we all well know, as many of you are pointing out here. AOC, that's right, AOC is from New York. What's the name of the one that is from Minnesota? I think she's a Somalian or something like this. I forget her name. So here, I'm going to end this little section with what's going on while the TV is cramming riots down our face and looting, getting us all pissed off about that. Well, Hillary Clinton went to court and lost her case regarding the missing emails and will be forced to testify in September. That was on June 2nd. On June 3rd, Rod Rosenstein testified in front of the Senate regarding Russia. And on the June 4th, the Senate votes to subpoena over 30 Obama officials in the Obamagate case. And there is, the news on this is like a fine print in the back page. But these are very significant items. And these are items that people like George Soros definitely wants people to be blind to. George Soros wants to cover this stuff up. And mostly because allowing this to become the headlines will destroy the Democrats' chance in November. And they have the world's largest hate on for Trump. Trump is standing in their way of a one world government. That's what they're worried about. Trump is in their way to the formation of the one world government that George Soros has had a hard on for 50 years. And I think I just broke my tongue from bad words, but whatever. George Soros has a big hard on for a one world government. That's no secret. I do have links for this. I can get them into all of these topics here. I did look up each and every one of these points here on June 2nd, June 3rd, June 4th. These are legitimate points. They were reported on, but it was buried. I'm going to pause here for a moment and recognize Sean Tower. Thank you so much for your continued donations and support of Studio Burley, Sean. Sean says, my clueless feminist nieces are running about screaming of white privilege and racism, yet understand nothing of Canada's history. Their own grandmother at age 8, indentured servitude. Indentured, I think you mean. Indentured servitude. Yeah. The propaganda masters of the feminist movement have certainly won a lot of minds over, especially impressionable young minds with no experience of life. Going to acknowledge James Burlow. Thanks, James, once again for your support of Studio Brûlé. And James says, BLM are the stormtroopers for Democrat Party. Yeah. BLM and Antifa. And the Democrat is a far left party. It is a danger to liberty and freedom in the West. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next set of, this is on, the next little segment is on the coronavirus. The coronavirus, which has been totally upstaged by the riots. Doesn't it seem odd that the whole world was locked down for a virus that is turning out to be, and the Japanese have determined this, is like a mild flu. It's not as lethal as an ordinary flu, the Japanese have recently reported in the last couple of days. I don't have the clips for that, but if you Google it, you'll see the links come up. And here Forbes is reporting that Norway scientists' report proves coronavirus was lab made. Well, I shouldn't be surprised at that. I'm not terribly surprised at that. That Wuhan lab was researching this exact same thing, and the Wuhan lab was the one that released it. They did deny. There's so much denying going on here, folks, that little by little the truth is bleeding out. And we're at the stage now that they cannot no longer deny that the coronavirus was lab made. What is the next thing that's going to leak out? It's your guess or mine. But it's very interesting that they successfully imprisoned the entire Western population, virtually destroyed the small businesses of the West, and shut down the economies of the West, putting all the news on the coronavirus long enough to get all the news over onto Black Lives Matter rioters, and taking all of the attention off of the investigations into the crimes of the Democrats and the lefts and the people like George Soros. This is very, very suspicious. Let's read on. The claims by the co-author of the British-Norwegian study published in the Quarterly Review of Biophysics are supported by the former head of Britain's MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. Reading them from the top. They also highlight the lack of mutation since its discovery, which suggests it was already fully adapted to humans. That's a good point. The study goes on to explain the rationale for the development of BioVac-19, a candidate vaccine for COVID-19 that is now in advanced preclinical development. The vaccine and the virus seems like were developed in tandem, together. Imagine accidentally releasing a man-made virus to the world, then insisting that life cannot go back to normal until everybody takes the virus that we also just happened to produce at the same time as we produced the virus. I mean, they're not making it hard to be a conspiracy theorist. Ay. They should make it a little bit challenging, but they're just throwing everything right out there at you. Here it is. But it's a conspiracy. Let's read from the top. This will make all countries think through their relationship with China and how they relate to China's leadership, said Dearlove. He also added that the report had been rejected by multiple scientific publications to avoid angering China. It took this long. Think about this, folks. Throughout the coronavirus crackdown and quarantine, all of these scientific publications refused to publish this research. They refused. Isn't it funny that they were only able to get it published by a science magazine after the riots and looting took over the news, and now that the quarantine and the coronavirus is out of the news, then they were allowed to publish it. I mean, if the leftists are not actively, deliberately behind all of this, it sure is playing out exactly as they would want it to play out. What good fortune the left has that all of these things in sequence just happen to be suiting and supporting their goals. Wow, the whole universe is on their side, right? Or is it planned? Let's read this quote from Jason Thill. Thank you so much, Jason, for supporting Studio Brûlé. And Jason says, with how powerful propaganda can be, how many otherwise good people are being manipulated to stand on the left's side? How do we reach these people? Surely not with hate, but how? Well, we certainly don't give in to them. That's the start. Don't kneel to them. Don't be silent. Don't let them put words in your mouth publicly. They'll videotape you doing it and you'll never walk it back. They're trying to humiliate you. And by humiliating their opposition, I said this before, imagine a group of people who disagree with the left getting together after having knelt before the Black Lives Matter and Antifa terrorists and having said the words that the terrorists want you to say, and then getting together and trying to drum up the energy, the psychic energy, to unite against them. How would they trust one another? The ability to trust your fellow man who has already knelt before the terrorist is gone. It's gone. The entire group who might otherwise oppose the terrorists, that group won't trust one another. The group is therefore demoralized. That's the purpose of the propaganda. That's the purpose of the humiliation. 5 guys get together, each have knelt before the Antifa and kissed their boots and have repeated their lies, called themselves guilty, called themselves white supremacists, and then they're going to trust one another and fight back? Not going to happen. That is why they're trying to humiliate everyone in our society. That's why they're trying to get you to kneel. That's why they're trying to get you to speak on their behalf, to say their words, so that you won't trust one another enough to be able to manage a defense. It is a sick game they're playing. Don't kneel and don't repeat their words. And here we have another one here. They are relentless. They are determined. George Floyd's lawyer asks the United Nations to intervene in the case and make police reform recommendations. They want to bring an outside power into the US, exactly like the writers of the Constitution warned you about. They want to bring the UN in to dictate domestic policy in the US. This is exactly what George Soros wants. This is exactly what the one world government people want. How is it that George Floyd suddenly becomes this hero? Riots run amok, and George Floyd's lawyer calls upon an external global organization to fix things in the US. This is what they want. This is like pointing the finger directly at George Soros for this entire sordid escapade. Let's read from the top. Ben Crump, the attorney representing George Floyd's family, has called on the United Nations to intervene and investigate the circumstances around the middle-aged black man's death to make recommendations about law enforcement. A foreign power on American soil. There's millions upon millions of dollars behind this, folks. Let's read on. The United States of America has a long pattern and practice of depriving black citizens of the fundamental human right to life. What a bald-faced lie. The United States government has consistently failed to hold police accountable and did not bring federal criminal charges even in cases with irrefutable video evidence. Well, we certainly can't address every case here in this claim, but what we can say is that the guy who had his knee on George Floyd's neck was arrested very quickly and is facing murder charges as we speak. There is no justice system in the world that can work any faster than that. No legitimate justice system in the world. The George Floyd case illustrates not that the American system is dysfunctional, but that it is working exactly as we would hope it to work. That is what the George Floyd case before the law is demonstrating for everybody with eyes and ears. George Floyd's assailant, the police, was arrested almost immediately upon the release of these videos, and the police along with him have lost their jobs. Why is it that they can claim that the United States is not acting just in this case? They have no claim here. And yet they're whipping the rioters up and the terrorists up into an unholy fury, and they're trying to call the UN into the domestic affair to right the situation. In other words, to have power over the US. That they will not accomplish that is besides the point. It doesn't matter whether they accomplish it or not. It is showing their goal, their intent. Let's read on. Last Wednesday, Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, called out structural racism in the US. There is no structural racism in the US, folks. For there to be structural racism in any country, there has to be racist laws and public policy in place. There is none in the US. There is some in Canada, and it's against white men. The Canadian Charter of Rights protects all identified groups in the Charter, and the only identifiable group that is missing from the Canadian Charter of Rights is white men. So the only structural racism in North America is in Canada, and it is against white men. There is no way to avoid that. It is the plain, provable truth in writing. Let's read on from the top. The voices calling for an end to the killings of unarmed African Americans never need to be heard. The voices calling for an end to police violence need to be heard. And the voices calling for an end to the endemic and structural racism that blights U.S. society need to be heard, Blatchulett said. Blatchulett, okay, I'm consciously biting my tongue here. Blatchulett is bald-faced lying. She's a radical feminist. She works for the UN. She has a goal of turning the UN or some organization like it into the first one world government. She's running a propaganda war on behalf of the George Soroses and his crowd who want to massively expand the power of the United Nations. This is why she is openly lying like this. And I don't believe for a minute that she is stupid enough to believe her own words. She cannot possibly be that stupid, or she would not have got to this level of power. Okie dokie. So that is one aspect of the coronavirus, including how it's connected to the Black Lives Matter rioters and terrorists. So let's carry on to another favorite topic that's going on as we speak as well. And it's part of this because these people are all connected. This little news item came out in Canada. University of Alberta fires an anthropology professor for saying biological sex is real. And get this. This is a feminist, but she is a gender critical feminist. She had a different opinion from the strict teachings of the radical feminists. And for her differing opinion, she was fired from a university as an anthropologist for suggesting that biological sex is real. This is the insanity that has taken grip of our entire university systems. And if you've paid attention in the last tweets of the last couple of days that Janice started up, there is a shut down academia thing going on. And all of these academics are coming out claiming that academia is filled with racism. That's nonsense. Let's read this from the top. It was in March that Lowry was asked to resign from her position. She was told that the reasons for this were that the learning environment she created was unsafe for students. This was as per the university. On the basis that one or more students had gone to the university's Office of Safe Disclosure and Human Rights and the Dean of Students, Andre Kostopoulos, to complain about her without filing formal complaints. Listen to what's going on here very, very carefully. I mean, this could have been lifted or written right into George Orwell's book of 1984. Gone to the university's Office of Safe Disclosure. Office of Safe Disclosure. Safe for who? It's certainly not safe for the professor involved. And she, or this person, or persons, put in a complaint about the professor without filing a formal complaint. So this Office of Safe Disclosure can take some hearsay from some student, it only takes one, and get a professor kicked out. And they have the nerve to call this Office of Safe disclosure, and human rights. What right is protected for that professor? Not any right. Not even the right to make a clear and obvious scientific observation that biological sex is real. Our universities are fully given over to the insane lunatics that come from women and gender studies. The feminists, the radical feminists, are the mothers of this too. There is no avoiding this, folks. Let's read from the top. Her employer empowered students to damage their teacher's career and livelihood. It is the type of power which today's students are accustomed to yielding, much as the Red Guards routinely punished their teachers for wrong thinking during the Cultural Revolution, in China, that is. This is what has come in full force to Canadians and to Americans. And if you think it's staying on the university campuses, then you haven't been paying attention. That fellow at Vox it's Vox or Spike, one of them, who said that this cancel culture wasn't going to leave the campuses was wrong. Well, this hearsay destruction on the basis of not sufficient ideological purity is coming off campus too. These real Red Guarders here, these Red Guards, are going to be graduating from those universities, and they are going to be disseminated into every single pillar of our society. They're militant, they're racist, they're bigoted, they're ideologically committed simpletons. And they're competing with one another for who is the most ideologically pure. This will wreak havoc in every area of our lives in the West. Reading from the top. The University of Alberta justified its decision on the basis that a student or students informally complained to the Office of Safe Disclosure and Human Rights that Lowry made the learning environment feel unsafe for them by voicing gender-critical feminist ideas. So this professor is a feminist. She's a gender-critical feminist. And she claimed that biological sex was real. That's how easy it is to lose your job in the ideologically pure university systems that we have today. Reading from the top. It is difficult to imagine how a teacher could communicate knowledge on that topic without reference to biological sex, as opposed to the relatively recent academic trend of gender identity. However, Lowry's employers felt that her reference to the importance of biological sex broke with orthodoxy to such an unacceptable degree that she had to go. Don't send your kids to university, folks. There's no point. They will come out stupider than they went in. They will come out ideologically indoctrinated. They will come out unable to think for themselves in any way, shape, or form. They will come out bigoted, radical feminists. Let's read from the top. The university did not give any reasons for dismissal, other than the fact that an informal complaint had been received. Think about that for a sec. Some simple-minded, radical feminist bigot walks into an office, says she feels unsafe, and the professor's life is destroyed. No questions asked. Let's read on. They said that it is not in the best interest of the students or the university for Lowry to continue in her post. In effect, an institution of learning claims it is protecting its anthropology students from confronting the reality and importance of biological sex because the students don't want to have to think about it. That's at a university. This is incredible. I can't even tell you how, and I've been looking at this stuff since 2012 in depth, almost full time for 8 years. And you just can never say it can't get any worse, because I guarantee you they are dreaming up worse every single day. They are dreaming up ways to make it more ideological, pure, more ignorant, more Orwellian. And it will get worse. Reading from the top. It is remarkable how much power the students now have over female teachers, at least. Well, come on. Not just female teachers. They have even more power over male teachers. Male teachers are so vulnerable on campus. They can't twitch their eye the wrong way without being accused of something, or possibly of rape. Let's read on. All they need to do is whisper the magic word transphobia behind closed doors for the institution to show her the door. That's where we're at today. And folks, don't think for a minute that this is as bad as it's going to get. It will get worse. Which reminds me of a saying my dad used to say quite regularly. At least I've heard it first from him. He used to say, things are never so bad that they can't get worse. Now, in some contexts, that's optimistic. In other contexts, it's pessimistic. And in this case, it's pessimistic, because it is going to get worse. Let's read on. And trust but their opposite. It appears that students with mental health issues or misogyny issues, or both, are running the show, rather than capable adults with a commitment to academic values. Well, I don't think they're misogynist issues. They're really mental health issues, but they're also just plain up garden variety radical feminists. Probably do have mental health issues to be that sensitive. But maybe this woman had another ulterior motive for going after that particular teacher. Maybe that teacher gave her an unacceptable mark. Maybe she complained about the mark and the teacher refused to raise it. Now, she doesn't have to give any reason. She just goes into this office of bigotry and hatred in the Orwellian office and says, the teacher made me feel unsafe. They don't even have to give a reason. They just say the teacher made me feel unsafe. In this case, she felt unsafe because she has that risk of failing the course and the teacher wouldn't give her a higher mark. That could be what's going on here, folks. Don't kid yourself. They will do that. I'll guarantee that that's going on. And I want to pause here to recognize Jason Thill again for generous support of Studio Brûlé. And Jason says, what do you see state of the U.S. to be in 10 years, 20 years? Do we overcome this? That I don't know. But I do know that this upcoming election is very important. That's why I feel. And I feel that's a lot of what's driving the hatred, the rioting, the terrorists, and the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa, and the funding coming in from George Soros and Act Blue and all these organizations. This is motivated by the fear of this upcoming election. They don't want to see Trump get in again. They have a burning hatred for Trump, and they have a burning desire. They can almost taste the destruction of capitalism, the destruction of the Western way of life, or what the feminists like to call the destruction of patriarchy. They're very serious about this. For the feminists, patriarchy and capitalism and the Western way of life, these are all connected things. They've been openly saying they're going to tear down the patriarchy, code for all of the above, for 50, 60 years. George Soros has been funding them. George Soros has been wanting a one world government as long as he can remember. And George Soros is just one amongst many who are on that team. So this upcoming election is going to determine a lot. And if the Democrats win, I would say, folks, find yourself a state to move to, if you're American, in which they defend your Second Amendment rights, that is the right to bear arms, where they defend your freedom of speech, where they defend your presumption of innocence. Move there, and because I think there will be civil war fought, a bloody civil war fought if the Democrats win. It may be a bloody civil war fought if the Democrats lose even. That is another possibility. I don't think these, but I actually think that these leftists see this as an opportunity, their best opportunity they've ever seen to tear down the US, create a one world government, and also deflect from all the criminal activity that the Democrats have engaged in for God knows how long. Let's read on here. Such is the power of the student as consumer. In an age of intense conformity of thought within liberal institutions, all it takes is hearsay from one or two students for the usual rules of employment disputes to fall away. No formal complaints process, no transparency regarding the nature of the accusations made, no disciplinary process. The accused is guilty. The accuser is anonymous. Now, think of the chill that's going to put upon every professor. When a radical feminist walks into your office and says, you know, I didn't deserve a D, I deserved an A. Do you think that the radical professor, the professor is going to object? He's going to say, why? How did I miss that on your paper? Yes, your paper deserves an A. You're right. That's the only answer those radical feminists will accept. You comply with them or they destroy your life. And the feminists have put those levers of power into every university in North America. And they're bringing those levers of power into every business, into every political organization, into every courtroom and the legal structures. They're bringing those levers of power. Read on here. All of this shows just how fragile gender ideology is. If one woman teaching an anthropology course can be made out as public enemy number one just because she knows sex is real and that it matters. Now here's another item here that's recently come up. I've got two more items on this to talk about, and that'll be it for today. This is respect to the coronavirus. If you remember, the feminists were predicting that women would be shoved back into the kitchen barefoot and pregnant as a result of this coronavirus lockdown, but it didn't materialize. Once again, the feminists, their predictions are pure hate-mongering and fear-mongering. Let's read this title. Dads fail to disappoint as expected when it comes to doing pandemic housework, a study. The broader trend is that men have risen to the occasion, bucking predictions that the pandemic would cause a regression in domestic labor patterns along gender lines. Men have been men. They rise to every occasion. Men make this world work. Let's read this. Masked up, gloves on, visor maybe, or sunglasses with a rigid sense of purpose and a constant fear of death, people go grocery shopping these days like they are storming Normandy. I think you're going to like a couple of these comments out in this quote. The new element of viral danger has made grocery shopping a more masculine activity, more brutish, less finely tuned, and among heterosexual parents in Canada, more his sort of housework than hers. Now, they don't come out and claim this here, but I'm going to make a point on this very, very soon. Let's read this. The broader trend is that men have risen to the occasion housework-wise, bucking the theoretical predictions of academic sociologists and pundits that pandemic would cause a regression in household labor patterns along gender lines. Let's just back up to that previous one for a second here. They're suggesting that this is about more masculine activity. No, it is not. It is not. Shopping is not the more masculine activity because of all of that. It is this. Men are taking on the more dangerous tasks as usual. Their wives get to stay home where there is no risk of being exposed to the virus. The men are taking the risk of exposure. As usual, the men are risking their lives in protecting their wives. But the article doesn't even go there, even though this is pretty clearly obvious. Let's move on here. So on grocery shopping, the virus risk also engages gender expectations, such as thinking that if dad gets sick, he can lock himself away in a room, as Sheffer described it. But if mom gets sick, then holy hell is going to break loose. Listen, just look at how they twisted that. The man is doing the equivalent here of staying with the ship while the woman gets in the life raft. This is what he's doing. He is going to the dangerous side. He's in the ocean where the sharks are. He's out in the grocery store with the viruses. The woman is staying home protected. And the reason they're showing here is that because, oh, well, dad has the luxury of locking himself away if he happens to get a little sicky-wicky. But mommy, if we can't afford to have mommy get sick because nobody in the family can't survive without mommy. This is what they're suggesting here. But the reality is, in every man and woman's life in this situation, the man is putting himself in the way of the bullet so that the woman's life is protected. Just think of the gendered bigotry they're twisting through their minds to avoid saying that. We know this is true because that's what happens in every single dangerous situation that comes down in our society. If there's a mass shooter, men cover the women's bodies with their own bodies. Some men who have been killed doing that. Men put themselves in the way or risk themselves in the way of speeding cars to protect their kids and wives. They jump into freezing water. Men put themselves in the risk to protect or save the wives and children. That's what's being done here. But they're pretending here that it's because we can't afford to lose mommy because mommy is the important part of the family. She's the protector. Daddy can get sicky-wicky and go and hide in his room if he's so weak to get sick at the grocery store. And this in spite of knowing that the coronavirus is twice as lethal to men than it is for women. If there was any rationality, if there was any equality, it would be the woman who would say, I will go to the grocery store because this virus is less risky to me as a woman than it is to you as a dad. But no woman will ever say that. There are no feminists in a house fire, as they say. Every last woman is willing to risk her husband to go to the grocery store, even knowing that the virus is twice as lethal for him than it is for her. Now, let's switch gears to what's going on right now. And this is another telling article that's coming out. Read the headline with me. Divorce reforms delayed despite expected surge of post-pandemic marriage breakups in Canada. Well, there may well be post-pandemic marriage breakups. I don't know. That's not a certainty. But these pundits are claiming it to be a certainty. So let's read on. The reforms, there's reforms coming in divorce in Canada. The reforms will, for the first time, provide a comprehensive definition of family violence and require courts to take into account instances of abuse. Well, you know darn well, before we even get to the quotes here, that they are defining, in word even, that the abuse is committed by men and that women are the victims. So men, here's a picture showing what's going on here. And this woman probably angry because this guy held back $5 out of his salary to go out for a couple of beers with his buddies. She wants a divorce. Let's read what these reforms are about. The federal government was delayed implementing reforms to Canada's Divorce Act, just as family law experts, read radical feminists, are bracing for a surge of women seeking divorces after being cooped up for months with abusive partners. I mean, that's the opening statement in this article. A surge of women seeking divorces after being cooped up for months with abusive men. I mean, the bigotry in that is astounding. And yet that flies by every editor. And of the readership, think of the men reading this. Men, you're the abusive partner. When your wife, who screamed at you nonstop for 3 months, and you've taken all the risks, and she's gone off and banged Shad next door, and she's going to go to court, and on her word alone, you will be determined to be the abusive partner. This is the bigotry of Canada's court system. And keep in mind, in Canada, in the Charter of Rights, there is no protection for a white man to be treated equally. The Charter of Rights in Canada allows discrimination against white men explicitly in writing, because it is not, white men are not a protected group. Every other group is protected. So you can do whatever you want to a white man, and you will not be breaking the Charter of Rights in Canada. Reading on. Among other things, the highly anticipated reforms will, for the first time, provide a comprehensive definition of family violence, and it's written by radical feminists, folks, and require the courts to take into account any instances of abuse when making decisions about parenting. Men, I've said it before, marriage is indentured servitude. Do not, under any circumstance, get married today. Certainly in Canada, but I think it's better we can extend this to the entire world. Marriage is indentured servitude, and as an indentured servant, they can do whatever they want to you. A woman's word is evidence. A man's word is worthless in these situations. And these laws are being written by radical feminists. Let's read this. The new act includes an expansive definition of family violence that refers to coercive and controlling behavior. Where have we heard this before, folks? A couple of weeks ago, we looked into the Australian case of the woman who beat her husband's head in with a hammer. She spent 9 years in jail, and they changed the laws over there, and then they redefined her as being under his coercive, controlling behavior. This is coming to Canada in full strength. Only men will be accused of coercive and controlling behavior. And if you go back and you look at that woman, I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but it is legal. You might as well consider it, in all practical values, legal for a woman to murder her husband in many jurisdictions in the West today. She merely needs to claim that he exerted coercive and controlling behavior, and the only way she could escape it is to bludgeon his head in with a hammer. Let's read this, continue reading this. In Canada, the Divorce Act is going to include family violence in it, and it's going to include coercive and controlling behavior, and details the kinds of abuse that Cross said aren't often taken seriously by the courts, such as economic and psychological abuse and threats to abuse of pets. Now let's just look at that. Economic abuse. You know what that means. Feminists have already told us 20 or 30 years ago that withholding money from a wife is economic abuse. Psychological abuse. This is virtually an absolute nightmare, common of wives against men. I lived with a woman for 2 years, my son's mother, who yelled at me nonstop, who, when I had to work nights for a period, would knock on the door so that I could not sleep. I had to lock the door and put in earplugs. And I guarantee you that that the courts would laugh at this. They would laugh at it. It would never be called psychological abuse by the wife of the husband. It just will not be. This is radical feminism. The man has been defined as the perpetrator. The woman has been defined as the victim, as surely as they've defined racism as being a white person's thing, and that being a victim of racism, you cannot be white. Whites cannot be victims of racism. Men cannot be victims of abuse. So, having said that, folks, I cannot stress this any stronger. Do not get married. If you're married and being threatened, get out of it as soon as possible. Even if she's hinting at radical feminist ideas, you really have to get out of there, because they will escalate. They will either escalate or you will shrink. You will shrink into the background. You will become a non-entity. You will have no identity over 20 years of facing being under the thumb of a radical feminist in a marriage, or any feminist. There is no possibility of a relationship of equals when one of those people has their finger on a trigger with a gun pointed at the other's head. And that is exactly what the law and family law and what radical feminists have created in Canada and most of the West. Marriage today is indentured servitude of men. Get out of it. And if you're not married, don't ever consider it. It is a terrible idea. You are signing away your liberty, your freedom, your individuality. Don't do it. So that's all I have in the prepared quotes for today, folks. I had hoped to read you something that I had posted in Facebook not too long ago, but I think Facebook might have taken it down. And it had to do with white privilege and what I think about white privilege. Now, it was up there just the other day, but I cannot find it. White privilege and white guilt, and what I think about it, and I had hoped to read it. I'm just going to take one more scroll down my Facebook page to see if I can find it. But all I can say is I think it has been. I think Facebook took it down. It's the only explanation, because it's not showing here. Oh, wait a second. Okay, I spoke too soon. Here it is. Okay, maybe I can put this up on the side over here. I don't know if it's going to really read very well. All right. So I do want to emphasize this, because this is to me, this is important. I don't know if it's as important to every one of you as it is to me, but I am disturbed by this whole use of white privilege and white guilt. I'm going to read it in full for you here on white privilege and white guilt. The divide created by the domestic terrorists, BLM, Antifa, and the feminist crowd who created the terms white guilt and white privilege cannot be breached. They are bigots who seek to humiliate and dehumanize others while giving themselves permission to abuse with impunity. White privilege and white guilt are thinly veiled accusations of white supremacy. The accusation is a racist act that would not be tolerated by anyone genuinely against racism. These terms dehumanize the individual, reducing him or her to the unforgivable sin of being white. There is privilege in the world, but it comes from such things as wealth and political power, which come and go. But you cannot change the color of your skin or your sex, no matter what Rachel Dolezal says. Attaching culpability to an unchangeable attribute is bigotry. Furthermore, it is a choice to identify as BLM, Antifa, or feminist, and doing so includes accepting the group's ideological structure and the bigoted use of these terms. That makes you a bigot. It is a choice that you can change at any time, unlike the color of your skin or your sex. Now, the one thing I'm going to add about privilege is that studies have shown that a beautiful woman and a tall man both are treated better for having those attributes. So a beautiful woman is treated better just for being beautiful. Her life is easier. She receives easier promotions. She gets jobs easier. Everything comes easily to a beautiful woman. So we could identify that as an unearned privilege. But it has nothing to do with being white. It has to do with a trait that can be from any race. It's a trait of being lucky to be born beautiful. The same thing has been studied in men, but the characteristic is height. Tall men have easier routes to promotions, have more more success, and probably more sex too, but have more success in their careers, get jobs easier, and are treated better simply for being tall. That is a privilege that they were born to. But the rest of those things are unrelated to what feminism is doing with white privilege and white guilt. There is no such thing. That is just a veiled threat or a veiled accusation of white supremacy. It is an act of racism to claim somebody has white privilege. So that's all I have to say today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you come back again for the next coffee break with Steve, which I regularly forget to drink my coffee. As usual, I like to remind everybody to do something that you love every single day. If you don't have something that you love, find something, because it is even in the worst of times, it is one of the best things you can do for your mental health. Your life, every day is your life. Right now is your life. So do something you love every single day. And with that, I'm going to say good night and hope to see you again tomorrow on Coffee with Steve.